grateful to be here with you all. We will be working on step 9 tonight. So please join me in the set-aside prayer with the willingness and the desire to have an open mind and open heart with the gift of courage as we apply our 9th step. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my step 9, and my recovery, so that I may have a new experience with my amends, my honesty and courage, but especially my relationship with you. So we are on step 9, as I said, which is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So back on page 14, we looked at the second half of step 1, and Bill said, it's simple but not easy, and also that a price has to be paid. What he meant was the destruction of self-centeredness. That's the price. This is the dismantling of the false self, the deflation of the ego at depth. Step 9 is the only step powerful enough to accomplish such an immense task. On page 77, Bill says, our real purpose is to be other-centered, and this is the turning from ourselves to others, and in this case, it is about the people we have harmed. We agreed at the beginning that we would go to any lengths for victory over our addictions, and this is where we are going to be tested in our desire to be victorious. Admitting we are or were wrong is not a comfortable action for us. In our vulnerability, we learn to protect ourselves from so many dangers that were mostly in our mind that we knee-jerk anything that resembles our looking less than. Bill says on page 79, reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences might be. This is the antidote spiritual experience to our spiritual malady, which we know is unmanageability. The exact nature of which is selfishness and self-centeredness, as Bill confirms on page 62, and elaborates further on page 52 as the bedevilments, the behavioral description of selfishness and self-centeredness. These are what it looked like. When we connect all the dots through all these descriptions in order to see the internal nature of this process, it is startling yet amazing. And what is the definition of harm? This is a question that many struggle with, and Bill knows what we are going to have to come to terms with, and he knows because of his own experience in recovery. So we start with naming the person or people. We write about the harms we believe we have committed. We ask ourselves, how did our behavior affect this other person? The 12 and 12 defines harm as physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual damage to people. Some examples it offers are a consistently bad temper, lying, cheating, selfishness, irresponsibility, carelessness, being cold to other people, impatience, being critical, and attempts to control others. Being armed with a continuous complaint and negative demeanor. These are the behaviors for which we will make amends in step 9. Our recovery depends upon healthy elimination of these defects, or at the very least, we need to begin to reduce the number, power, and frequency of these character defects. The 12 and 12 says, we can go far beyond those things which were superficially wrong with us, to see those flaws which were basic, flaws which sometimes were responsible for the whole pattern of our lives. Thoroughness, we have found, will pay, and will pay handsomely. So the 12 and 12 says, we can go far beyond those things which were superficially wrong with us, to see those flaws, which are basic flaws, which sometimes are responsible for the whole negative patterns of our lives. Thoroughness, we have found, will pay handsomely. Reject the idea that we might have harmed no one. Our ego voice will say, "You don't understand, I am the victim here." When we were using, someone was always compromised. It's time to take off the blinders and see the part we have played. We look only to ourselves and our side of the street. It is tempting to look away from our wrongs to what we believe others have done. Don't look here, look at them. Look at the wrongs, real or imagined, that they have done to me. Bill later wrote in the 12 and 12 that the purpose of step 8 and 9 is to develop the best possible relations with every human being we know. And he mentions it over and over again because it was a big deal to Bill to encourage people to understand the importance of the amends process. The implication is that we ought to be willing to go to jail, but then Bill says that's probably not common. So he then suggests a letter written to the wife who is owed back alimony payments. In being ever practical, Bill adds, "Oh, and by the way, in the envelope, send a little money." My computer's ticking. Here we go. No? There we go. Okay. So in step 9, we are looking at the actions, principles, and modeling that is given to us in the big book. Bill suggested writing the ex-wife first, admitting his faults, and asking for forgiveness. It is pretty simple. We keep it clear, honest, and transparent. If you choose to do a letter or email, first have it reviewed by someone who has objectivity and experience in this unique area, especially if we are new to the concepts. We don't have a lot of common sense in this area, and it needs to be addressed with sensitivity and potentially legally for some issues. Bill says on page 80, before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. Remember the guideline, unless to do so would injure them or others, and that includes ourselves. So we make sure our amends doesn't further impact others negatively, as that is not the goal. And Bill gives an example of somebody who had done some gossiping in a very libelous way and hurt their reputation objectively and very dramatically. Probably small town gossip kind of stuff that went on, but a very dramatic disadvantage to a person and interfered with his reputation and his business and finances. So this man needed to make a public apology, but he talked to his wife first. She was involved with him because they are connected in this small town. He also has a partner in business that is going to be potentially affected by this. So he asked to ask both of their permissions. When they said yes, take care of it, he went to the local church where most of the town was gathered, and he acknowledged what he had done so that everybody was clear on the other person's lack of fault regarding the libelous information that he had spread. He says after that, of course, the townspeople really trusted him, so it actually improved his life. But we never know what's going to happen. Just because we are finally being honest doesn't mean they will be receptive and supportive. They can also be aggressive and retaliatory in their admittance. Bill says that whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Not always, we think. The intent of Bill's answer is no, if they don't know, we don't tell them. If they know in a general sense that we have not honored our boundaries within a committed relationship, they might want more information. It is human nature to want more details, not realizing the information usually makes admittance of an affair more difficult to get past when the details are explicit. Giving more specific details is a personal decision, but it would behoove us to keep the specific details out of the admission. We want to keep the other potential people involved out of this. Confiding names of our partners in crime puts them in harm's way, and our goal is to not cause further harm to anyone. In my life, with my experience in a cheating spouse, it was a catch-22. Not knowing drove me nuts, and then receiving the details brought further questions and more pain until I realized I was taking his actions personally when they had nothing to do with me. When a person cheats, that is on them, and for my part, perhaps, I was denying him, but the solution to that is to have a discussion, not an affair. It is very personal, and it has to be you that makes the final decision on how much to divulge. In the big book, page 81, Bill suggests that because the recovering alcoholic has found a new equal designed for living, the spouse should be able to let go of resentment and forgive past transgressions just as the addict has. Bill says our design for living is not a one-way street. It is as good for the wife as it is for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. Well, that statement from Bill is evident in its ignorance, a direct contradiction to the last part of the step, where it says, except when to do so would injure them or others. And in later years, he engages in some self-correction on this very position. In the 12 and 12, he issues this cautionary statement. Are we going to be so rigidly righteous about making amends that we don't care what happens to the family and home? In the big book, in 1939, we were told that it would be necessary to risk everything. Then later in the 12 and 12, which was 1953, we are told there may be some need for caution. Most would opt for caution. 14 years of experience obviously pushed Bill in that direction. And it's worth remembering that Bill was raised over a century ago, and while he could justifiably be accused of possessing sexist, narcissistic attitudes, when Bill wrote the literature, now being objected to as sexist, he was reflecting the prevailing attitude of the time. On page 82, he says, perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. So Bill suggests each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in your mind. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with that most terrible human emotion called jealousy. So these are a couple of short clips on making amends that I'm going to have you guys watch.
I've been a victim. I've had sexual assaults. I've had different things happen to me. But it doesn't mean it's not the both and. We can be a victim and do bad things. It's all of it.
Yes.
And so, there are amends to certain people that have done us wrong, but we've also done wrong. Like I think of divorces. So many people get so stuck with staying angry at their spouse when they've been angry for 20, they've been married for 20 years and done a lot of stuff. So it's about what the big book says, putting the person in the category of the spiritually sick and looking at your own behavior. Even if someone has done stuff to you, you still have to own your part to be free. Do you know what I mean? So it's not just about things you've done to innocent people. It's actually the hardest ones are ones where we rationalize and blame others and yet don't look at our part in the relationship. Yeah,
and I do want to acknowledge, like when we veer off the path, when we've done wrong, and it's normal that we all do wrong. Okay, this is normal. Totally, like it's natural, normal, and human to make mistakes. That's okay. The question is next, what will we do with it?
Yes.
And if we hide or rationalize it, we deepen our sense of shame and distance ourselves from others. And
Yeah.
there's two big ways we do this. And the first big way is to believe that we're the one who's good and everyone else is bad. And this is a form of self-justification. Well, my
Yeah.
ex was so terrible that the
Yes.
little things I did
Yes.
weren't bad anymore. They don't count
Right.
anymore.
Right.
The other way that we justify ourselves, and this was hard for me to learn. I learned this when I was very depressed, probably the most depressed part of my life, when I was like 20, 21.
Got it.
Was that also some people flip the opposite way and they decide, fine, I'm a terrible human being. I'm broken. I'm deficient. I'm disordered. Look at all these pathologies I have. I'm just bad. And that is just as likely to prevent someone from making amends, making repairs, reconnecting with the human race as the opposite, like these two different ways.
Yes.
And so for these folks, the second group where I was for a long time, which is, well, I'm just a bad person then.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
For them saying, well, you need to fix what you did wrong, they're going to be likely to just try to beat themselves up instead of actually making repairs, like wallowing, withdrawing, blaming themselves, labeling themselves. And that's not making amends.
I'm making an amends because an amends is warranted and owed. That's it. It's owed. It's like paying the electric bill, man. You want to grin while you pay the electric bill? Go ahead, but pay the bill. Because if you look at the step itself, the way that it's written, except when to do so would injure them or others. Right. What my sponsor pointed out to me, except when to do so would injure them or others. In fact, I might be setting myself up for some injury. But I got to be willing to go at it to make it right. Did I leave anything out? And how do you want me to make it right? That's good. That's a good outline. So the you make it right. Essentially, I'm powerless, and I'm giving you the opportunity to say, tell me. And here's the other thing to that too. Did I leave anything out? Sometimes I have no idea to the extent that I've hurt somebody else. Maybe I see surface level. Maybe even though I stole $1,000 out of my mom's purse and made amends for that, what really killed her was the sleep I was stealing from her. Mm-hmm. And I didn't mention that. That's why you give them the opportunity also to say, right. Did I leave anything out? No, Ben, it wasn't that stuff that hurt me the most. Let me tell you what it actually was. Exactly.
When I was 18 years old, I shot 2 people, and I'm incredibly grateful that they both lived. I was also part of a robbery in which people were emotionally, if not physically, traumatized. And I apologized on the stand when I pleaded guilty, as well as when I was sentenced. That's not the same thing as apologizing in the open world, apologizing after all these years. I'm not allowed to, though. One of the conditions of my release, as well as the condition of my original sentence, is that I have no contact with any of the people that I harmed. And that's set in place for a reason. I have already caused trauma to these people's lives. It's not my place to come in and say, oh no, I want to make this better. I want to apologize. I need to do this. That's up to them if they want to reach out and they want to hear that. But I would never impose that on them, even if I was allowed to. I did weirdly have the opportunity to apologize to one of the guys that I shot because he actually transferred me to the same prison that he was being held at. I didn't know this at first, and they didn't know this at first. It wasn't something intentionally done by the prison system. And once he went and told them, hey, you transferred the guy that shot me here, they locked me up and emergency transferred him. I knew how wrong I was, and I wouldn't have let him hurt me, but I would have done anything else to make amends.
So there you have a couple of examples of people making amends. It gives you a little variety. And I like what the second guy said when he asks the person, did I miss anything? Because we don't know the impact. We think we know the impact, and we might try to make amends based on that. But it's always nice to say, what was your take on it? What harm did you give? Because like he said, he didn't know his mom was losing sleep, and to me, that's probably worth more than $1,000. So I understood that statement. So getting back, so the suggested way of making amends in the big book puts it into 3 categories. If they don't know, do we tell them? In my and others in the program's opinion, the answer is no. In my experience over the years, my understanding of this step and how I use these guidelines in my own life. And it says in the big book that if they know in a general way, then you admit it without details. Then on page 81, if they know all of the details, the big book says to try to avoid having a conversation about the whole situation and the whole issue. Try to get a situation where you are both willing to release it and let it go in order to begin anew. What can happen is the person you're giving the amends to might want to really drag you into this story, into their version of the story, and how this and that. And like everything else, we're really not interested in the story. We're interested in making an amends. We know the story, we lived it. So try to keep the stories to a minimal if you can. And our goal is to get to a situation where both parties are willing to release it and let it go so that we can begin again with a clean slate, or we can choose to end the relationship in a form of healing. Page 82 says, perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. And we may not be able to find loving kindness when there has been serious betrayal and poor behaviors. So Bill says that we each might pray about it because Bill inevitably, in most of the steps, is under the assumption that we are powerless to do it ourselves. So if you come to a stalemate, offer it up to your higher power. Our human structure is that our biology is our destiny. Our genetics has determined an awful lot of the way our life is going to turn out. The two things that make us human from a structural, physiological, and biological standpoint is our third brain. It has two primary functions: to know and understand in a reflective way, and to make decisions in a completely free, involuntary way in order to take action. To know is a function to decide, and that makes us uniquely human. No other sentient animal or being that we know of has those two functions. It is the two things that make us human. And Bill says in both of those areas that addicts have a deficiency and are ineffective. Because we don't know that we don't know, therefore, we are subjected to delusions, which makes us unable to decide consistently to do the right thing. We do what we don't want to, and we don't do what we want to. Powerless to do that, and in every step and in each component of each step of the course, Bill suggests prayer. We can give it tons of thought. We can write pages and pages about it, and we can talk, lots and lots. But underneath of all of that, every step and every recommendation, Bill says, in the final analysis, you can't do anything really about it. Neither radically or existentially can we move these things that block the sunlight, not on our own power. We can't even reduce it by wishing or trying on our own power. We are in a war zone with unmanageability, and the more we try to control or fix it ourselves, the more unmanageable our lives become, because the only way out is through prayer, which is another way of letting go. On page 82, Bill says, sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is to keep sober. Certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wife, the children, the boss, siblings, colleagues, neighbors, or parents, whom for years he has so shockingly treated. Passing all understanding is the patient mothers and wives who have had the addicts back. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today and would perhaps be dead. And personally, from my perspective, my codependency was the motivator. It wasn't so much that I was the good wife, pick up the pieces because it was what he deserved because he didn't. It was about my need to not be abandoned, which is a discussion for another day. But we all have different things that motivate us. And sometimes our motivations look great, but they're really not. So the alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. When we look back over our lives, it is similar to witnessing a war zone or the devastation a tornado brings, destroying anything in its path without any regard. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came up out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. And to his wife he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" That's a perfect example of supreme denial. So on page 83, yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. Many people come to a 12-step way of life and they have much difficulty getting some traction. Some considered a newcomer to be anyone in their first 5 years of recovery in a structured 12-step deep discovery. The promise is that my mind will be awakened and that our will is given a higher power. My mind knew what the best way of doing things was, and my will was able to do it. But that didn't mean I did it. Accountability in prayer is the 1-2 punch of step 11 and step 12 on a daily basis are the absolute recovery from unmanageability. And sorry, but sorry isn't going to cut it. Bill W. emphasized that a remorseful mumbling or a simple "I'm sorry" is insufficient to repair the damage caused by addiction. Instead, he recommended making direct amends, which involves owning specific actions and taking tangible steps to rectify them without hiding behind empty words. Here is how Bill W. recommends apologizing without necessarily using the word sorry. Own specific actions, not generalities. Instead of a blanket, "I'm sorry for everything," specify exactly what you did that was wrong. Example, "I lied about where I was," or "I broke that promise." Sweep your side of the street. Focus exclusively on your own actions without criticizing the other person or blaming them, even if they were partly responsible. "I was wrong. I made a mistake." Replace "I'm sorry if" with direct accountability. The goal is to acknowledge, "I made a mistake. Let me clear it up for you." Propose concrete actions to fix the damage. If you broke something, replace it. If you stole money, repay it. If you damaged a reputation, try to repair it. A living amends is a behavioral change. The best apology is a changed life. Bill W. emphasized that consistent, sober, and reliable behavior over time serves as a continuous nonverbal apology. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Shift the focus from your guilt to appreciation for the other person, acknowledging their grace in a difficult situation. On page 83, Bill writes, "We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Our amends is for our behaviors and actions. If they want to give you their own amends, we kindly ask that they say that for a separate time. Their defects may be glaring, but chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. Bill said, we really have made our partners and others crazy with our behaviors, with our lying and our betrayals." So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. Asking each morning that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, and we ask ourselves these questions. Is my attitude one of prayerful attention? What is my purpose? Number 1, to improve my conscious contact with God. Number 2, to embrace my usefulness to others. And number 3, to develop humility, makes it possible to receive God's help. In our morning meditation, we use our minds to create our vision of God's will for us for the day and every day. We pray to our higher power, please direct my thinking, especially divorce it from motives of selfishness, self-seeking, self-pity, resentment, fear, and dishonesty. Please clear my thinking of wrong motives. Allow me to be attentive. Think about the 24 hours ahead. What will I do? Consider my plans for the day. Who will I be? Envision my vision of God's will for me today. What is my intent? How can I best serve you? What is my vision? Decide to relax and take it easy, to stop struggling. What action is needed today? So having made our decision, we are completely committed to changing our behaviors, and we will repair it to the best that we can. But I add caution that this is not a lesson in perfection. It's a lesson in being adequate, because if we are painstaking about this phase, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. Our intention to accept responsibility for the potential impact of our behaviors on others and ourselves. But where guilt and shame are concerned, I am not responsible for other people's reactions or feelings towards me. As I don't hurt people's feelings, their reactions of hurt are their responsibility, not mine. I have to look at the circumstances that lead to their reactions. But their reactions are still theirs. I don't take on their suffering or responsibility, and I don't expect them to take on mine. As we clean up our side, they are responsible to take care of their side 100%. I don't educate them on this idea, and I think about my dialogue around this, should it come up during my amends. The purpose of step 9 is to gain peace of mind for ourselves by releasing feelings of guilt to get removal of my uneasiness. As I repair the damage and go about changing myself through steps 6 and 7 in prayer and accountability, I bring healing to them, and I am also healed. Therefore, the outcome is essentially the same. We strive to maintain a sense of humor, not meaning to have a good time of this, but to maintain a healthy sense of humor, which is that of humility, that lack of need to be defensive, and of course, we be tactful. Be generous and consider their well-being, not our own, even though ultimately we will all gain well-being from this. And let's look at when an amends shouldn't be made. Don't avoid making amends as an excuse. There are times when making amends could cause harm. Situations to avoid include cases where the person was traumatized by your actions, where making an amends could put you in danger of use or harm, when the individual explicitly requests no contact, when making amends would reopen painful wounds such as a betrayal that ended a marriage. In these cases, reflect on whether reaching out is to clear your own conscience at the other person's expense. This is where an experienced sponsor or step guide, or even a counselor's feedback, could be helpful in checking your motivation. And sometimes stepping back is the best way you can make amends. Giving a person space and honoring their right to feel what they feel about the impact your addiction and behaviors have had on their lives. It is very important to be mindful of motives and boundaries, and to recognize that the act of making amends is for you and not the other person. You are setting the record straight to clean up your side of the street, so to speak. You may be tempted to take this step too quickly with the primary goal of making yourself feel better fast and avoiding the uncomfortable feelings that have come up from examining negative behaviors. What happens when an attempt to correct your wrongs may cause further harm? For instance, disclosing past theft to a current employer, if they don't already know, might lead to termination, which hurts the amends maker's family more than it helps the company. Just keep in mind that there are instances where too much information, TMI, can cause further harm. Being present, acting differently, and sticking with commitments are powerful ways to make living amends. Making amends is not an opportunity to trauma dump on the recipient. In fact, it should be an exercise in humility and restraint, focusing on the changes you need to make and how you have and will sustain the change. And again, how do we become willing to make our amends? This is where our burgeoning relationship with our chosen higher power comes into play. After making the list, we should pray and ask for the strength to make amends in general and the power to address those on our list whom we resent. A persistent practice of prayer and meditation will help you reach the point where you are willing to make the specific amends you're holding back on. The goal in making amends is to take responsibility for our actions. This is a practice we will continue throughout our lives, taking account of how our actions impact others and correspondingly taking responsibility for the consequences of our actions is a task that we don't ever graduate from. Once we complete this step, we will be far quicker to notice our wrongs, acknowledge them, and make immediate amends for them. This can be accomplished through our daily Step 10 prayer practice. Our amends will also help us do less damage in the future by showing us our hidden truths and how to remedy them. The less damage we do through recovery work, the more free we will be. The behavioral change that we make is an accurate compass of how far we have come. So I would love to hear about your amends process if you are willing to share them, or certainly any other issues, questions, or concerns you may have regarding step 9, or whatever step you might happen to be on, because not everybody's on the same step. But open for questions for anyone that's got any. Don't want to talk. Has anybody made any amends to anybody yet since we started the step? Go ahead, Mark. Or unless you're just raising your hand.
What'd you say?
Unless you're just raising your hand to
No,
confirm.
no.
Okay.
Excuse me. No, I started making some like 99% of my amends are financial amends, and I'm working on my money stuff here with you
Mhm.
guys. So I'm kind of like in a pattern of I started making or continuing my 9 step amends last week, and then I made some amends as part of my assignment. So I didn't do I don't know if I did the book reading or the assignments like 100%, but the action part, in terms of like like paying down a little bit of debt last week, and then I did some of that yesterday, and I just counted it as part of my assignment. And then
Mhm.
excuse me, but I think what's been really sort of like powerful about working with you guys is really sort of like not so much nine, but really like eight in terms of like seeing like is there any kind of ought in quotation marks, or is there any kind of resentment in terms of why it's taken me so long with some of these, like, and just looking at that forgiveness thing, which is not nine so much as it's the previous one, eight. I don't know. Somebody's unmuted. If you can mute, that'd be cool. Appreciate it. Um, and so I don't know. Like that's sort of like what's been coming up, and then I'm gonna review some of these with my sharing partner. I think this weekend, and I think one kind of interesting thing is excuse me is just even watching some of my daily like behavior and realizing that there's still things that I do that I think or I had thought were set in stone as part of 6 and 7. And I mentioned 6 and 7 because of course if I do the wrong thing then I have to, like make amends. And just realizing that some of the things that I think are set in stone, like maybe acting out in pride, or as I was telling like a sponsee that like I have this tendency to argue with strangers online, and I realized that really that doing that as an example blocks me from doing some of the stuff that I really need to be doing as far as the addiction that I'm really working on with you guys here. And it was just really kind of clear when you started, even when you guys were at the beginning before you even started doing the thing. I just started really thinking about some of the events today, that I wouldn't necessarily consider that I need to make an amends, but just looking at my behavior in terms of, is this bringing me further towards living, being, especially like that whole bit about being a maximum use to the people about us, which is actually in one of the chapters that really sort of like hit me, like is this behavior I'm doing, am I of maximum use to myself and the people about me? And I'll leave it there, I think. Yeah.
Mark, it's great to hear how far you're coming. You're really making all kinds of leaps and bounds, it sounds like. And what really tells me that you're getting it is you're looking at stuff that you probably didn't look at before, and you're actually looking at it now, and you're thinking about it, and you're questioning it. And that's the best place to be, with an open mind. That's that open mind, open heart. If we have ideas stuck in our head, it's going to be really hard to go around them and do some of the stuff that you want to do. But you're really looking at stuff, and you're really questioning it, and that's half the battle. So kudos to you for doing that. I think you're doing fantastic.
Is it okay to ask Mark a question?
Sure. Do you mind, Mark?
No, that's fine.
I just was wondering, you said that most of your amends have been financial, where you've, written off some of the debt, you paid off some of the debt and whatever. Did you also talk to the people before you did that, or was it just a matter of you making a payment on the debt? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, was there an amends to a
Yeah.
person in addition to making the amends that way?
I mean, in my case, I've been in recovery a long time. So
Okay.
what happened for me is that the where I've gotten into the most trouble in recovery have been my other addictions. And so some of my behaviors have mostly harmed me. And then the behaviors that I've exhibited inside of my first recovery that harmed others were money, was money stuff. It was just straight like, like stuff for qualifies me for like DA and other
Right.
things like that. So my problem would be, and even my problem with my first recovery was that when I got to the ninth step, I had a bad problem with money, and most of my amends, even for my first thing, were I owed money. You know what I mean?
Got it.
And everything was unmanageable. So for me to actually make it right, and I wasn't taking care of myself, wasn't possible. And so like for based on what I've done in two money programs is that I have to take care of myself, and then it's kind of, instead of like this grandiose thing that I kind of tried to do when I was in my first program, because sometimes what I would do is I essentially take my whole check and try to pay everybody off, and it was crazy. But I was like sort of like doing the letter of the law, except I was kind of like not taking care of myself. Like, so I would pay off people when I was new in my first program, but I wasn't taking care of myself. So I
Got
don't
it.
do that. I don't do that kind of like anymore. And then as far as talking to people, a lot of that stuff is kind of living amends. Like, for
Right.
example, I have established stuff with like my family afterward, like my folks are elderly, and there's kind of stuff that I do as opposed to not do. I and I think to kind of wrap up, like the bulk of the stuff that I have on two of my amends list is just like, this is how much I owe. How can I do that? Praying to God, like I have willingness or I don't have willingness, or how do I make the money to do this? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I
Yeah,
think
no,
I'm
that was
taking.
very helpful. Thank you, Mark.
Mark, I have a question before you leave. How did you feel knowing you made the payment and it was an amends that you were doing? Did you feel like a sense of relief? Did you feel like, oh, this is the feeling I was trying to get to, or did you feel like, dang, I had to pay them? What was the feeling of like?
Well, I don't know. Like, I have one amends that I have one guy that, like, I've known since I was like a teenager, and he was like, he's a couple years older than me since like we were basically kids, and I've owed him money for since then, really. And to give you an example, like, it's been really kind of interesting because like he's kind of like grateful that like I'm finally sort of like doing it. It's not even like a bad thing. Like, I give him like different amounts as I get it, and it's kind of like been a healing thing because he's been really grateful. I don't know if other people did that with him, but it was like many, many years ago. I borrowed the money, and he kind of was like, he didn't want it back. But what ended up happening, since in this workshop with you guys, God just told me to pay him back anyway, even
Mm.
though he had kind of like written it off, because it's like, I don't know, for whatever reason, God wanted me to pay him off, and like I pay him, and he's kind of really grateful. Now I don't know that all my financial meds will be like that, but I mean, it's kind of been like, this is what I'm supposed to do. To answer your question, I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really helpful. It gives, kind of that perspective of how does it feel when the person actually makes the amends. If there's people here that haven't made amends yet, and how do you feel after you do it? I had amends that I felt, relieved that I finally did it, but then I kind of felt like a schmuck because I had to admit a lot of stuff. So for some people, it can bring a lot of mixed emotions. And then there's been other amends that I made, and I felt like I was set free, and that was just such a fantastic feeling. So I guess the conclusion of that is that, the different amends will bring different feelings about when you make them and what the circumstances are. But I think there's always, when you're in a 12-step workshop or program of any kind, when you actually get to make an amends, it's, you're putting your foot in front of each other and you're actually walking the walk. It's really the first action that we take, other than, deciding, isn't it God, which is more of an intellectual feeling kind of thing. So, the immense part is I'm putting my feet on the ground, and I'm walking towards my recovery, and I'm walking towards my freedom, and I'm walking towards a better life. So, I think to keep that in mind, um, when there are amends being made. And it's one of those things where we don't want to make amends if it makes life more difficult for anybody, ourselves included. If we're going to make an amends and it's going to eliminate somebody really important in our life and they're not aware that something happened, an indirect amends would probably be, a great way to go. Because we're human. We screw up, and it doesn't mean we're always going to screw up or we're going to do the same thing, but it doesn't mean we have to implode our lives either over trying to make it better. Go ahead, Rochelle.
Oh, I made an amends a while back at this, and sometimes, especially if it's to a store or a business, sometimes the person that was affected isn't there anymore. And so I went into this store where I had wanted to buy something, and there were two parts to it. It was a China thing, and I dropped it and it broke. And instead of just going up and paying for it anyway, I didn't want to pay for it at that time. So I pushed it to the back and I took another one and checked out with that one. But it bugged me, and I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. And finally, years later, I went back and I said to the guy, and I looked in the back to see what it costs now. And I went up and I wanted to hand him the money. And he looks at me, it was a young guy, and he said, "Oh, you're one of those people." And I said, "Yeah, I'm one of those people." And he said, "Oh, you're like apologizing, right? This is like you're making amends, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Cool, cool." So he said, so I hand him the money and he goes, "Well, what am I supposed to do with this now?" Because, it wouldn't balance in the register or whatever. I said, "Well, maybe you can just give it to the owner or manager of the store." I said, "My part is just giving it to you. What you do with it now is really of no interest." But I just thought, "Oh, you're one of those people." And I thought, well, good. I'm not the only one doing this. And especially, I think, in a store where things can break, it's probably more common. But I felt so much better afterwards. And I'm sure he's going, "Well, I don't know what to do with this money. I don't know." But it didn't matter what he thought. It only mattered what I thought. And the fact that I could go in that store again with my head held high and buy something else. I didn't have to think, "Oh my God, they're videotaping everybody." They didn't have videotapes at that time, but there's a video somewhere of me stealing this thing and whatever. And you don't have to worry about that once you make the amends. You're clean. So
It's always amazing how shocked people can be when we do the right thing, isn't it?
yep,
You walk in, you say, I want to pay the money, and what are you, crazy? You know, that says something about society,
yeah,
that somebody wants to make something right, and people will like, what do you mean? I don't know how that works. That's pretty sad.
well, especially now there's places, like I was at a place today in California where they don't take cash. And then it's like, okay, how does he write it up? Making amends in a 12-step program is what I'm buying. It's easier if you can just hand them cash and say, "This is for what I did." So,
Right, right. Yeah, that would make it a little bit tougher, but not impossible.
right,
If you're thinking about an amends and it's a certain amount, they don't take cash, then you compute it in your mind so that it's covered or whatever.
right.
Very good. Hi, Jill.
Hi, so I have two separate comments about amend making. So recently, I got a call from my one of my daughters who has a new child, and she just decided that she was just going to scream at me for, for something I might have said or whatever. So she really, and I listened, I didn't get defensive. I go, you know, I said something that triggered her or something in the conversation. And uh, I uh, I listened to her. I tried to make amends. I'm sorry. I said that I didn't. I didn't want to justify it. I just go, "I'm really sorry. That must have been tough to hear that," even though if I said the same thing to somebody else, maybe they wouldn't have gotten, but she's my daughter. So I just figured, well, we have a different relationship, mother-daughter. So I have to take this seriously and, and apologize. And then she goes on and she brings up everything I've done to her in her entire life. She goes through the whole thing. Well, you did this and that and the other. Well, of course, I did do a lot of things because I learned a lot of dysfunctional stuff from my family that I didn't know was dysfunctional until I'm doing recovery work. So I just made amends, and normally we would really argue about this. I think it's recovery working, because I would keep justifying and saying, you're off base, and I just said this, and instead I just apologize, because amends are part of the recovery. So might as well make an amends here, even though I don't really see it. She does. So I didn't do it flippantly or whatever. I meant it seriously. And normally she wouldn't talk to me. She would say, you know what, I need to make boundaries, and I will contact you again when I'm ready. And she didn't. She just said, I must have did a good job, because the next morning she called me like nothing happened, which is not unusual. So I'm just sharing that I'm starting to be okay, I guess, with making mistakes, even though because I'm a nice person. I don't try to make mistakes, but I have children and I offend them. So I don't mean to. So anyway, I just wanted to say that one. It's working for me. And then the second thing is, I think I'm going overboard with amends, because there are certain situations where I am so unsure of myself that I'm afraid to speak. So, because I feel like I'm going to make a mistake and hurt somebody's feelings. And the most recent example is somebody close to me has lost their husband. And I have heard so many stories in my lifetime of people who've lost significant people, and somebody said a hurtful thing, even though they didn't mean to. They felt it was like not the right thing to say at the right time, and they felt really bad, and they never forgot, why would this person say that? How could they say that? This is such, so what I've been doing with the most recent one, and I think it's weird because it's different for me, but maybe it's kind, and I want your opinion. I say something like I want to offer support, but at the same point, I've been researching exactly what I should say. I went and studied, somebody told me, look at the ring theory, or some people call it the circle theory or ring theory. You got to find out where you are in the circle in a crisis. And if you're in an outer circle and people you care about are in the inner circle, you're supposed to say certain things. And if they're in a circle beyond you, that's where you can maybe have other feelings. It's called the ring theory. So I used that a little bit I knew. And so what I do is I reach out and say, I'm sorry. I don't know exactly what I say, but I offer to help. I offer to help because I think that's really important when someone's lost somebody. How can I help? But people get sometimes like, why do they just say, how can I help? I don't know what I need. Some people go, I'm in crisis. I'm freaking out. Why don't they just offer something? So I don't know really anything to say. So what I said was, instead of asking, what can I do to help? I said, I can come by and help you do such and such if you'd like that. And then I add, it's okay if you say no. So every time I'm doing that, I'm seeming to do it more, and I offer something, but I always say it's okay if you say no. And it just feels weird, but it also feels like it gives them permission not to feel that they have to please me. But I'm guessing on that. So I feel like there's some dysfunction in that way to communicate. So I've been doing it. No one's called me on it yet, but I wanted your opinion on
Could I just say something real quick? I'm a widow, and I love that you're thinking about it. I just makes my heart happy because you can't take away the pain. You can't undo that the spouse died. And I love that you're being so thoughtful. And the only thing that might have helped me was somebody saying, I know you have a lot of help now. I love that idea, the circles. If you're in the outer circle, maybe it's the people in the inner circle bringing meals and doing stuff. And maybe when that's over and down the road, I'll still be willing to help. And I just had my high school friend just had surgery, and she's in New Jersey, and I said, would you like me to send in a meal? And she was unoverwhelmed because everybody, and I said, you know what, when you're ready and one night you just don't have anything and whatever, would you just text me and I'll order something? But but I just love that you're thinking. You're so considerate. I wish somebody had done that for me.
it. Thank you. And underneath it all, what's underneath is my worry that I'm going to offend, and then I need to make an amends. And I'm like, I just want to live a life that I don't need to make amends. I would
You,
love
you
that.
know, Jill, if you're offering to help or give solace or whatever you want to call it, and somebody receives that in a negative way, that's on them, not you. Totally. I mean, you're saying I want to help out. This is a terrible time, and if the person is offended by that, you do not owe an amends. We don't make amends for people's reactions to the way we live our lives. We make amends when we purposefully, intentfully set out to do harm, and that is not a harm. There was no harm involved. So,
Oh my gosh, that's not what my kids say. My kids, like, you look what you did to me. Why aren't you apologizing? You don't, but I didn't intend harm, but they felt it was harmful. And I'm sure it
you
probably
know,
was.
Yeah,
So
I'm a child of an alcoholic home, and my children are it's on both sides. And when my children on very unusual occasions said to me, you did such and such, and my response was, then call a therapist, because if I'm the culprit, I don't have the solution. You don't go to the rapist and say, help me deal with the rape, right?
wow, that's outstanding. Thank
So
you.
that's what I tell my children. If you have an issue from how I perhaps raised you, when my intent was always to be a loving and kind mother, was I? Of course not. I was living a real distressed life, and I'm sorry, and I've made amends for that. So if you're struggling and I was the problem, you can't come to me for the answers. It'll
Love
never
that.
work.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, don't go to the rapist for recovery. You can't. And don't internalize what they're doing with their dysfunctions. Saying like what your daughter did and she lambasted you, basically. That is a reaction that can happen when we make amends. The person feels like, okay, they're opening up, I'm going to open up, and it's a floodgate. And that's not fair, because when you go in to do an amends, it is a very calculated, thought about, planned. You're in a group to talk about it. It's not you just drop a bomb like that. So if you're in a situation where you've made an amends and somebody turns on you, you can shut it down. You can say, this is not what I came for. This is not why I spoke up about this. If you want to think about what you want to say to me, we can talk about it at another time, but not now. Not now. I'm giving you my amends. And I don't want it downgraded because you're going to retaliate and say things about me. No, don't allow that. You're going to have to put your big girl pants on and say, you know what? I'm your mother, and I my goal every day was to be loving and kind. And there were days when that was a struggle because of what was going on. And I'm sorry for that, but I don't deserve to be treated poorly because I was in pain. If I walked around with a bandage on my head, they probably wouldn't do that, but they don't see our pain. Our children don't see pain. Moms aren't supposed to have pain. How can they get rid of pain if they're in pain? So they don't allow us to be who we are. And especially in the addiction realm of things, blame me, but then you're going to have to blame your grandmother. And, how far back do we want to go in the blame game? We don't want to get on that train at all.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of one thing that's humbling, and I just when it happened, I said this is definitely higher power. I
Mm.
think it was the next morning because it was before she had called back, I think, or maybe right after. But I decided to go to my cell phone and look at my pictures and stuff, and I have things for years and years and years. And I found a video of my mother and me having a conversation. I didn't know that was really what I was going to be. It was a video, and it turned out that um, I was upset with her video, and I'm listening to it, and it sounded just like my daughter, and
Mm.
I was like, oh my gosh, I talked to my mother like she's talking to me. And it was very humbling. I wanted to tell my daughter that, but it would just go to deaf ears. I haven't told anybody except you guys. It's very humbling.
Well,
And
you might want to tell one more person, your
okay.
mom.
Oh, and she's passed away, so I'll tell her
Give
in
her,
my
give,
thoughts.
however you do, yes. But
Right.
at least for yourself, you have a little amends there for your mom because now you got to see it from the other perspective, which is a fantastic gift.
No, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. I do talk to her often, and I
There you
might
go.
have at the time, but I'm going to get a little deeper with that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joe. Go ahead, Cesar.
Hey, Lisa. Hi,
Hi, Susan.
everyone. So I made living amends to my sister, who I've had, a long, a lot of resentments for a long time. But recently, she called me and she said something hurtful, and then that resentment cropped up again, and then my mom's inheritance money and all that came up. And now I have to do another living amends. And is that something that happens? You do living amends like over and over again with the same person? I mean,
Well, it depends. Sometimes with people that are in a really close relationship, like a sibling or a spouse or something, the events can be multifaceted. So we make an amends and we think we've ticked the box, but there's other degrees or there's other perspectives of that same issue. And what I generally tell people to do first is a resentment worksheet on the issue to make sure you're feeling like it's cleared up before you go and make an amends about it. Because a lot of people they just want to get to that place where they make the amends, and a lot of it is, we're people pleasers and we're addicted to other people and we don't want to be abandoned, all these things. So we want to run and apologize. We want to be in control in that way. So you just want to, take a real good look at it and make sure you were thorough when you did the amends or the resentment around it. And there might be parts of it that you weren't aware of or weren't paying attention to at the time, and it just needs to be cleaned up again.
okay.
But that doesn't always necessarily mean there has to be an amends again. If you've already made the amends, they're not aware that you might not have figured in all the different facets of it.
Yeah.
That you gave an amends for a basic way you were treating them. If you feel like you look at this and you say, oh, there's a piece here that I forgot about, it's important enough that I need to have another amends with my sisters, and I'll go ahead and do that. But if it's not, then no, we don't need to do that. It's not like, we all have to get on board and say, oh, I just got to get all these amends. I'm going to get as many as I can. And this is going to be, a
Yeah.
great thing to do. And it's not really like that. It's not, we're already vulnerable people. We've already been through the ringer.
Yeah.
We've all lived with either our own active addiction or someone else's. We've not had the easiest road, any of us. So we don't want to complicate it or downplay ourselves any further and say, "Oh, we need to make more amends," because that's how bad we are. It's not about that.
Mm.
So if you feel like, it's coming up and your behaviors warrant an amends, then yes. But otherwise, no.
Okay. So go back to my resentment, step
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
Okay.
And do a new sheet.
New
See
sheet.
if
Okay.
when you get through the whole, both sheets, see if when you get through it all, if it's the same thing, or maybe it's seems like it's the same thing and you find out it's a new additional or another kind. But start with that
Okay.
worksheet, this, column 3 and 4, because that's where your amends will show up, is in those worksheets. That's how we determine who do we need to make an amends to, which is why we tell people in the beginning, pick 10 or 12 people, the serious ones, the close people, the people that really matter. That's where we want to look at the resentments, because they're going to become our amends also.
Yeah. I mean, my sister, this one sister, I've had a resentment with her for so long. I've had a really hard relationship with her. So yeah, when I did my amends, my living amends, oh, it felt so much. I felt so free and relief. But now it's back again.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll go back and do a 4th step.
Yeah, you do have to look at it. And there is, in the big book, Bill does say some of the relationships will end when it comes to amends time. Because sometimes we can't get out of that cycle of resentment and not resenting and resenting and not resenting, which basically indicates to us that it's not a very healthy relationship. And we're trying to get healthy. So we might want to at least shelve that relationship till we feel stronger or we feel like we're in a better place and that we're not going to get pulled back into it, which is, sounds a little bit like what might be happening with you. You're getting pulled back into your old resentments because you've got some new stuff that's coming up and it awakens the old stuff.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. You're welcome. Good luck, Cesar.
Thank you.
All right. If anyone else need to share or tell us anything about their amends,
I'm not there yet, so
that's okay. That's okay. Don't rush it. When you get there, you get there. And you can ask questions when you do. So next week will be, I had explained that Herb put three lessons in one lesson, and it was too much to put into this whole thing. So next week will be that third of that. So, you don't have to worry if you've already looked at that third video or whatever, but it'll be on forgiveness, which is the next step we tackle. All right, so if you'd like to unmute and we'll do the serenity prayer. Or not, up to you guys. God, please grant us the serenity
To
accept
accept
the
the
things
things I
cannot
cannot
change,
change, courage
courage
to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, I might be done.
Great work, everybody.
Thank you.
take
We'll
care,
see you
Lisa,
next
and
week.
everybody. See you
Thank
next
you.
week.
Stay
This is
warm.
a pleasure.
Stay warm. That'll be it.